ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ನ ಈ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯ ಎಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಗೆಳೆಯರೆಲ್ಲ ಸೇರ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ನಮ್ಮ ಹಿರಿಯರಾದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ B.K ಸುಬ್ಬರಾವ್ ಅವರ ನೆನಪಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಒಂದು ಸರಣಿಯನ್ನ ಆರಂಭಿಸಿ ಆ ಮೂಲಕ ಅವರಿಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ಒಂದು ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನದ ಕುರಿತಂತಹ ಒಂದು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಗುಡ್ ಅಥವಾ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ರಿಲೇಶನ್ಶಿಪ್ ಅಥವಾ ಸೊಸೈಟಿಗೆ ಅಥವಾ ಸಮಾಜಕ್ಕೆ ಅದರಿಂದ ಆಗ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಅನುಕೂಲಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವರಿಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯನ್ನ ಬೆಳೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಅಥವಾ ಉಳಿಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋದಕ್ಕಾದರೂ ಕನಿಷ್ಠ ನಾವು ಏನಾದರೂ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ನಾವು ಅವರ ನೆನಪಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರತಿ ವರ್ಷ ಒಂದು ವಿಶೇಷವಾದಂಥ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸವನ್ನ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಸಂಬಂಧಿತ ಒಂದು ವಿಚಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ಆರಂಭಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಈ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ B.K ಸುಬ್ಬರಾವ್ ಮೆಮೋರಿಯಲ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ನ ಆರಂಭಿಸಿದ್ವು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಮೊದಲನೆಯ ಆರಂಭಿಕ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ನ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಒಂದೆರಡು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಹೊಸಬರಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುಬ್ಬರಾವ್ ಅವರು ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ಮ CPS ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಅವರ ಒಡನಾಟದ ಕುರಿತಂತ ಒಂದೆರಡು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಇಷ್ಟಪಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ನಮ್ಮ ವೆಬಿನಾರ್ ಪ್ರೋಟೋಕಾಲ್ನ ಪಾಲಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ತಮ್ಮ ಇದನ್ನ ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ ಇದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸಹಕರಿಸಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ನಾನು ಮುಂದುವರಿತೀನಿ. ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಎಲ್ಲರ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲೂ ಬಹಳ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಹುಟ್ಟು ಮತ್ತು ಸಾವು. ಅದರ ನಡುವೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಬದುಕು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವರು ಬಹಳ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕಲಿಸಿದ್ರು ನಮ್ಗೆ. ಅದು ಎಷ್ಟರ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ನನಗೆ ಅವರು ಒಂದು ಫೋಟೋ ಹುಡುಕೋಕ್ಕೂ ಕೂಡ ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಯ್ತು. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಯಾಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಏನನ್ನು ಬಿಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ಬಹಳ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕಲಿಸಿದ್ರು ಒಂದ್ ರೀತಿನಲ್ಲಿ. ನನಗೆ ನಾನು ತುಂಬಾ ಕಿರಿಯ ಅವರಿಗೆ. ಅವರು ಈ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಗುಡ್ನೆಸ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಮತ್ತು ಒಳ್ಳೆತನ ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ನಾವು ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು, ಯಾವ ಗುರುತುಗಳು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅಲ್ಲ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ಎಷ್ಟು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಕಲಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ತುಂಬಾ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ನನಗೆ ಅವರಿಂದ ಪಾಠ ಕಲ್ತ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಕಳೆದ 25 ವರ್ಷ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಒಡನಾಟದ ಅನುಭವಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಅದರಲ್ಲೂ ಕಳೆದ 10 ವರ್ಷ ಅನೇಕ ವಿಷಯಗಳನ್ನ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋ ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆಲಿ ನನಗೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಂತ ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾದಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಒಳ್ಳೆತನ. ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸುಸಂದರ್ಭ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಾರ್ದು ಒಂದ್ ರೀತಿ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರು ಇಲ್ಲ ನಮಗೆ, ಆ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಇದನ್ನ ಸುಸಂದರ್ಭ ಅಂತ ಕರಿತಾ ಇದೀವೇನೋ ಅಂತ ಅನ್ಕೋಬಾರದು ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು. ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ, ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಈ ತರದ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ದಾಖಲಿಸ್ಬೇಕು, ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಸರ್ ನಾನು ರೆಕಾರ್ಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಡ್ತೀನಿ, ನಾನು ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಬರೆದಿಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅಂತ ಏನಾದ್ರು ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ಇಲ್ಲಪ್ಪ ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ನನ್ನ ಕೈಲಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ನೀನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ನೀವು ಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ನಾನು ಬರೆಯೋದಿಲ್ಲ, ನಂದೇನಿದ್ರು ನಿಮ್ಮಿಂದ ಹಿಂದಿರೋದಷ್ಟೇ ಅಂತಕ್ಕ. ಸೊ ಈ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಗುರುತನ್ನು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ನಾವು ಅವರ ನೆನಪುಗಳನ್ನ ಅವರ ಒಳ್ಳೆತನವನ್ನು ಬಳಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಾವೇ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡೋದಿದ್ರೆ ಮಾತ್ರ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಅವರ ಶ್ರೀಮತಿ ಅವರಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರ ಮಗ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರ ಕುಟುಂಬದವರಾದಂತಹ ಶಂಕರ್ ಅವರಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವರೆಲ್ಲರ ನಡುವೆ ನಾವು ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನ ಆರಂಭಿಸ್ತಾ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಈ ಒಳ್ಳೆತನ ಮತ್ತೆ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಇವುಗಳನ್ನು ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ನ ಸಹಕಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ತಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಇರಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಎಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಆಹ್ವಾನಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವರು ಬಹಳ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ನನಗೆ. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರು ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನ ನನಗೆ ಪರಿಚಯಿಸಿದ್ರು, ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಓದುಗಳನ್ನ ನನಗೆ ಕಳಿಸಿದ್ರು. ನೀವು ಓದ್ತೀರಾ ಚನ್ನೇಶ್, ನೀವು ಓದಿ ಕೊಡಿ, ತಗೊಳ್ಳಿ ಇದನ್ನ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನ ತಂದು ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಬಹಳ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಸೈನ್ಸಸ್ ನ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ವಿಷಯ ನಾನು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳಕ್ಕೆ ಎರಡು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನ ಪರಿಚಯಿಸ್ತಾ ನಾನು ಅವ್ರು ಮಾಡಿದ ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಅನುಕೂಲ. 100 ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ, 100 ವಿಷಯಗಳನ್ನ ನನ್ನ ಜೊತೆ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಅವುಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾನ್ ಮುರ್ಟಾಫ್ ಅವರ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಜನರಲ್ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ಪುಸ್ತಕದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು, ತುಂಬಾ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಆ ಪುಸ್ತಕವನ್ನು ನನಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಇದನ್ನ ನಾನು ಸುಮಾರು ಜನ ವೈದ್ಯ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳ ಜೊತೆ ಹಂಚ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದೇನೆ ಕೂಡ. ಅವ್ರ ಸಂಪೂರ್ಣ ಓದೋಷ್ಟು ನನ್ನ ಕೈಲಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ ಬಿಡಿ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ವೈದ್ಯ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನದ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಯು ಕೂಡ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅದರ ಓದು ಬಹಳ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದದ್ದು. ಅದನ್ನ ಆ ಥರದ್ದನ್ನ ಪರಿಚಯಿಸಿದಂತಹ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವರು, ಅದು ಅಲ್ಲದೆ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಇನ್ ಡಿಫೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಫುಡ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಮೈಕಲ್ ಪುಲಾನ್ ಅವರು ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಪುಸ್ತಕವನ್ನು ನನಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟರು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದ ಮಾತು ಬಹಳ ನನಗೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೂ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದದಕ್ಕೂ ಬಹಳ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ಕಾಣುತ್ತೆ. ಅದೇನು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಆಹಾರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನೀವು ತಜ್ಞರನ್ನ ಕೇಳಬೇಡಿ. ಡೋಂಟ್ ಆಸ್ಕ್ ಎನಿಥಿಂಗ್ ಅಬೌಟ್ ಫುಡ್ ಫಾರ್ ಯುವರ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿಸ್ಟ್, ಆಸ್ಕ್ ಯುವರ್ ಗ್ರ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಮದರ್ ಅಂತ ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲೊಂದು ಮಾತು ಬಂದು ವಿಶೇಷವಾದ ಬರುತ್ತೆ. ಅದನ್ನೇ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಚನ್ನೇಶ್ ಹೆಂಗ್ ತಿಂತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ, ಏನು ಊಟ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ. ಸೊ ಈ ತರದ ಊಟ ಮತ್ತು ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಮತ್ತೆ ಮನಸ್ಸು, ಇವು ಮೂರನ್ನ ಸಮೀಕರಿಸೋ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವರಿಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಮತ್ತು ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ತುಂಬ ಅಗಾಧವಾದದ್ದು. ನಾನೊಂದು ಕಳೆದ 30 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ನನ್ನ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನ ಮತ್ತು ಸಮಾಜದ ಸಮೀಕರಣದ ನನ್ನ ಒಡನಾಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಸೈನ್ಸಸ್ನ, ಮೆಡಿಕಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ನ ಆ ಬಗೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು ಯಾರನ್ನೂ ನಾನು ಗಮನಿಸಲಿಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವರಿಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ಒಂದು ಚಿಕಿತ್ಸಕ ಮನಸ್ಸು ಇತ್ತಲ್ಲ, ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಕ್ಲಿನಿಕಲ್ methodology was totally different. I had many times discussed on many issues of health and food related issues. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮ ಕ್ಲಿನಿಕಲ್ ಸಿಂಪ್ಟಮ್ಸ್ ಹೇಗೆ ಏನು ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ತುಂಬ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟ. ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಖಂಡಿತ ನಾನು ಬರೀ ಇಂಟ್ರೊಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನೂರಾರು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಲಿ ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಹೋಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನೂರಾರು ನೆನಪುಗಳನ್ನು, ಸಾವಿರಾರು ಬಗೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥದ್ದೇ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಒಟ್ಟು ನಮಗೆ ಕಲಿಸಿದ್ದು ಭಾಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅಂದರೆ ಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕಗೊಳಿಸುವ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ಅಪಾರವಾದಂಥ ಒಳ್ಳೆತನ, ಪ್ರೀತಿಯನ್ನು ನಾವೇನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆದರೆ ಅದು ಬಹುಶಃ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೊಡೋ ಗೌರವ ಅಂತ ನಾನು ಭಾವಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ಅವರು ಇಬ್ಬರು ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಗಳನ್ನು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಹೀರೋಗಳು ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ರು. ಒಬ್ಬರು ಮೇಡಮ್ ಕ್ಯೂರಿ ಮತ್ತು ನೆಲ್ಸನ್ ಮಂಡೇಲ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ಇಬ್ಬರಿಗೂ ಇದ್ದಂಥ ಶ್ರದ್ಧೆ ಮತ್ತು ಅವರ ಕೆಲಸದ ಒಂದು ವಿಶ್ವಾಸ ನೀವು ತಗೊಂಡ್ರೆ ಸಾಕು, ನೀವು ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಅಂದರೆ ಅಷ್ಟರ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಅವರು ಭಾಳ ಸರಳವಾಗಿ ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲದನ್ನು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಕನ್ನಡದ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ರಾಶಿಯವರು ಅವರ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಪಾತ್ರರಾದಂಥ ಬರಹಗಾರರು ಮತ್ತು ವೈದ್ಯರು ಕೂಡ ಆಗಿದ್ರು. ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಇಬ್ಬರೂ ಕೂಡ ಹಾಗೂ ಮನೋವಿಜ್ಞಾನದ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದ ಅಧ್ಯಯನಗಳು ಮಾಡಿದಂಥವ್ರು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಈ ಎರಡು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನ ಮನಮಂಥನ ಮತ್ತು ಮನೋನಂದನಗಳನ್ನ ನನಗೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಇದನ್ನು ಓದಬೇಕು ನೀವು ಹಾಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, ನಾನು ಯಾಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಈ ಥರ ಮನಸ್ಸು ಮತ್ತು ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಮತ್ತು ಆಹಾರವನ್ನು ಯಾವತ್ತೂ ಸಮೀಕರಿಸ್ತವ್ರು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅವ್ರು ಯಾವಾಗೂ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು, ಏನಾರು ಮಾಡಿ ಚೆನ್ನೈಶ್, ಒನ್ ಥಿಂಗ್ ಯು ಶುಡ್ ರಿಮೆಂಬರ್, ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಇನ್ ಮಾಡರೇಷನ್. ಯಾವುದು ಅತಿಯಾಗಿ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಡಿ, ಎಲ್ಲ ತಿಂಗಳು. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಓರಿಯೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಭಾಳ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್. ಅಂದರೆ ನೀವು ಕೆಲಸದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ಕೆಲಸ ಓರಿಯೆಂಟೇಷನ್, ಅದನ್ನು ತಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ತಮಾಷೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ಅನಾಟಮಿಲಲ್ಲಿ ಏನೂ ಇಲ್ಲ ರೀ, ಮೂಗು ಎಲ್ಲಿರುತ್ತೋ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಕಣ್ಣು ಎಲ್ಲಿರುತ್ತೋ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ಆ ಥರ ಮೆಡಿಕಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ, ಅಂದರೆ ಓರಿಯೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಅದನ್ನು ಅವರು ತಮಾಷೆ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಜೀವನದಲ್ಲಿ ಓರಿಯೆಂಟೇಷನ್ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮುಖ್ಯ, ಪ್ರತಿಯೊಂದು ವಿಷಯಕ್ಕೂ ನೀವು ಯಾವುದನ್ನು ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಹೇಗೆ ಯಾವಾಗ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಏನು ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಹುಷಾರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಜೀವನದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ತುಂಬ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಅನುಭವಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಚೆನ್ನೈಶ್, ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಅನುಭವಿಸ್ಬೇಕ್ರಿ, ಹರಿ ಕೊಟ್ಟ ಕಾಲಕ್ಕೆ ಉಣಲಿಲ್ಲವಯ್ಯ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಲ್ವಾ ದಾಸರು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ತಮ್ಮನ್ನೇ ತಾವು ಎಷ್ಟರ ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ತಮಾಷೆ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ತಮ್ಮನ್ನೇ ತಾವು ಒಂದು ವಿಮರ್ಶೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ಇಬ್ಬರನ್ನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಎಚ್ಚರದಿಂದಿರಿ ಡಾಕ್ಟ್ರು, ಯಾವಾಗೂ ಒಬ್ಬರು ಡಾಕ್ಟ್ರು ಮತ್ತೊಬ್ಬರು ಪುರೋಹಿತರು. ಅವರಿಬ್ಬರು ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆ ಇದೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಇದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾನೆ ಹೋಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತ ಮೆಡಿಕಲ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಅವ್ರಿಗಿದ್ದಂಥ ಒಂದು ವಿಮರ್ಶೆ ಆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೋದು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಪುರೋಹಿತರು ಕೂಡ ಹಾಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲಾಯ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ, ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆನೂ ಹುಷಾರಾಗಿರ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಹೀಗೆ ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಸರಳ ವಿಷಯಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳೋದ್ರ ಮೂಲಕ ನಮಗೆ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದ ಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಬೆಳೆಸಿದರು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಪ್ರೀತಿ ಮತ್ತು ವಿಶ್ವಾಸ ಮತ್ತು ಗೌರವ ಇದೆ. ಅದನ್ನು ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ತಾವೆಲ್ಲರೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಸಹಕರಿಸಬೇಕು. ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ. ಸಣ್ಣ ಪುಟ್ಟ ತಪ್ಪುಗಳಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಅದನ್ನು ಬೆಳೆಸಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಸರಿಪಡಿಸಿ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಇದು ಮಾಡಿ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಈ ಒಂದೆರಡು ಮಾತು ನಮ್ಮ ಹೊಸಬರಿಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ನ ಬಗ್ಗೆ. ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟು cfpus.org. ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ವಿಷಯಗಳೆಲ್ಲ ತಿಳಿತು. ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ಸು, ನಮ್ಮ ಔಟ್ರೀಚ್ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ಸು, ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ಸುಮಾರು 140ಕ್ಕೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಲೇಖನಗಳು ಕನ್ನಡ ಮತ್ತು ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲೂ ಇವೆ. ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಬೈಲಿಂಗ್ವಲ್ ಇದೆ. ಸದ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೇವೆ, ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಓದುಗರು, ನಮ್ಮ ರೀಚ್ ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರೇ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ. ಸೊ ಇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಲಿಸ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಸುಮಾರು ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ಗಳು, ಅಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಡೀ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ನ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಗೆಯನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಆಗಿಸಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ನಮಗಿದೆ. ಸೊ ಆ ದೃಷ್ಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸದ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಒಬ್ಬ ಕೃಷಿ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಯಾಗಿ ಆಹಾರ ಮತ್ತು ಇಕಾಲಜಿ ಮತ್ತು ಜೀವಪರ ಸಂಗತಿಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಸುಮಾರು. ಆಕಾಶ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಲಿ ಅವರು ಎಲೆಕ್ಟ್ರಾನಿಕ್ ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರು, ಹಾಗೆ ವೆಂಕಟೇಶ್ ಅವರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಶಂಕರ್ ಅವರು ಕೂಡ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಮ್ಯೂಸಿಕ್ ಆಗಲಿ ಫಿಸಿಕ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾಡೋರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹೀಗೆ ಅನೇಕ ವಿಷಯಗಳು ತೆರೆದುಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಸೆಂಟರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ಗೆ ತಮ್ಮ ಸಹಕಾರ.
ಶೇರ್ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಶೇರ್ ಅಲ್ವಾ, ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀವಿ.
ನಮ್ಮ ಟೀಮ್ ಹೇಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ, ಹೇಗಿತ್ತು, ಹೇಗಿದೆ, ಹೇಗೆ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಇರಬೇಕು ಅಂತಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ 70+, ಈಗ ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಥರದವ್ರು ಇದ್ದರು, 60+ ಶಂಕರ್ ಅವರು ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಟೀಮ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬಗೆಯ ಒಂದು ವಾರಸುದಾರಿಕೆಯ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನವ್ರನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತ. 20+ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನ ಹುಡುಗರಿಂದ ಹಿಡಿದು 70+ ವಯಸ್ಸಿನವರೆಗೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಯಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಮ್ಮ ಹರಹು ಕೂಡ ಪ್ರೋಗ್ರಾಮ್ ಕೂಡ ಹಾಗೆ ಇದೆ. ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಇರ್ಬೋದು, ಇಂಜಿನಿಯರಿಂಗ್ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿ, ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಸೈನ್ಸಸ್, ಮ್ಯಾಥಮೆಟಿಕ್ಸ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಎಕನಾಮಿಕ್ಸ್, ಅಂದರೆ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲವೂ ಇದು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಇವೆಲ್ಲದನ್ನು ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಒಂದು ಪ್ಲಾಟ್ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ಒದಗಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸದ್ಯಕ್ಕೆ ನಾವೀಗ ಫುಡ್ ಫಾರ್ಮಿಂಗ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಆಗಲಿ, ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸು, ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಕೇಷನ್ನು ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮತ್ತು ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಈಗ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಟೀಮ್ ಬೆಳೀತಾ ಇದೆ. ಇದು ನಾವೇ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ನಾವು ಯಾವತ್ತೂ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಮ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಈ ಥರದ್ದು ಒಂದು ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಉಳಿದುಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದರೆ ಇವೆಲ್ಲದನ್ನು ಒಂದು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ನಾಲೆಜ್ನ ಡಿಸ್ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳಷ್ಟು ವಿಷಯಗಳನ್ನು ಈವನ್ ವಿತಿನ್ ದ ಸೈಂಟಿಫಿಕ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿ ದೇ ಟಾಕ್ ವೆರಿ ಲೆಸ್ ಔಟ್ಸೈಡ್ ದಿ ಡಯಾಸ್. ಇವನ್ ಮೆನಿ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ಟೀಚರ್ಸ್ ತಮ್ಮ ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ನ ಔಟ್ಸೈಡ್ ದಿ ಡಯಾಸ್ ಮಾತಾಡೋದಿಲ್ಲ ಅವರು. ಅಂದರೆ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಮುಖ ಕಾರಣ ಅದನ್ನು ನಾವು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಗ್ರಹಿಕೆ ಈ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮದೇ ಆದ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾದಾಗ ನಾವು ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯತೆಗಳು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗ್ತವೆ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದ್ರ ಮೂಲಕ ಅವುಗಳನ್ನು ಬೆಳೆಸೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಮತ್ತು ಅವುಗಳನ್ನು ಒಂದು ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕ ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಇದ್ರ ಭಾಳ ಅವಶ್ಯಕತೆ ಇದೆ ಈಗ. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದರೆ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ಕಿಗೂ ಅದ್ರ ನಾಲೆಜ್ ಇದು ಏನೋ ಅದನ್ನೊಂದು ಚಿಕಿತ್ಸೆ, ಒಂದು ಟ್ರೀಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಥರ ತಗೊಳ್ಳೋದಾಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಬಾರ್ದು. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಎ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದೇರ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕೋರ್ಸ್, ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದೇರ್ ನಾಲೆಜ್, ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ದೇರ್ ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್ ಮಾತುಕತೆ ಆಗಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಬಯಸ್ತಾ ನಾವು ಇದನ್ನು ಆರಂಭಿಸಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಸೊ ಇದಲ್ಲದೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಔಟ್ರೀಚ್ನ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ಥರದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ನಾವಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಇಂಟರ್ನ್ಶಿಪ್ಗಳು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಮತ್ತು ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ನ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ವರ್ಕಿಸ್ಬೇಕು, ಕೆಲಸಕ್ಕೆ ವಹಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂತಿದೆ. ಎಂಡಮೆಂಟ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಈ ಥರ. ಮತ್ತು ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಮತ್ತು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಶೇರ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಒಂದು ವಾಸ್ತವತೆಯನ್ನು ಬಳಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಏನಾದ್ರು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯನಾ ಅಂತ, ಮತ್ತು ಓಪನ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಪಬ್ಲಿಕೇಶನ್ ವಿಚಾರದಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ಸುಮಾರು ಒಂದು 6-8 ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನ ಪ್ರಕಟಿಸಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಹಾಗೆ ಡಿಜಿಟಲಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಎಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ಬರಹಗಳು ಕೂಡ ನಮ್ಮ ವೆಬ್ಸೈಟ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಗ್ತವೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಜೊತೆಗೆ, ಕಲಿಯೋರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ, ಎಲ್ಲರ ಜೊತೆಗೂ ನಾವು ನೆಟ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಒಂದು ವಿಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಒಂದು ಸೈನ್ಸ್ನ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಅಥವಾ ಒಂದು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಡಿಸ್ಕೋರ್ಸ್ನ ಪಾಸಿಬಿಲಿಟೀಸ್ನ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪ್ಲೋರ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಅದನ್ನು ಹೆಚ್ಚಿಸಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ನಮ್ಮ ಉದ್ದೇಶ. ಇದಕ್ಕೊಂದು ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿಕ್ ಟಚ್ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾಳ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್. ಯಾಕೆಂತಂದರೆ ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿಕ್ ಟಚ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಸೆನ್ಸ್ every physics student should know how his own knowledge should be discussed with public. Likewise, every health science person should know how the health science should be discussed with the public. ಈ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನಗಳನ್ನ ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ನೊಬೆಲ್ ಕಮಿಟಿನವರು, ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ವೆಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿನವರು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅಂದರೆ ಅವ್ರವ್ರ ಬ್ಲಾಗ್ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅವರು, ಅಥವಾ ಇನ್ ದ ಸೆನ್ಸ್ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂತಲ್ಲ, ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಅಂದರೆ ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕರು ಬಳಸುವ ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯ ಭಾಷೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯನಾ, ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯನಾ, ಈ ಥರದ ಪ್ರಯತ್ನಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ಸುಮಾರು ಪ್ರಯೋಗಗಳನ್ನ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಒಂದು ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದಂಥ ಒಂದು ನಮ್ಮ ರಿಸರ್ಚ್ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ಕಳೆದ 10 ವರ್ಷದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡಿರೋದು ಬಹುಶಃ 2022 ನಮ್ಮದು ಪ್ರಕಟ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಅದು ಸುಮಾರು ತುಂಬ ಉದ್ದವಾದಂಥ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಕೂಡ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತೇಳಿ ನಾನು ಭಾವಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ನಾವು ಹೇಳಿದೆ, ನಮ್ಮ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ನಾವು ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ಸುಮಾರು 4-6 ನೊಬೆಲ್ ಲಾರೆಟ್ಸ್ಗಳ ಜೊತೆಗೂ ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಕೆಲಸವನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿಕೊಂಡು ನಾವು ಅವರ ವಿಷಸ್ನ ತಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ಒಂದು ನೊಬೆಲ್ ಕುರಿತಂಥ ಚರ್ಚೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ CPS ಒಳಗೊಂಡಿದೆ ಅಂತ. ನಾವೇನಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ನಾವೇನು ಥರ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಅಕಾಮಡೇಟಿವ್ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು ಮತ್ತು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ನಾವು ಕ್ರಿಟಿಕಾಗಿ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಅಂತಂದರೆ, ನಾವು ಬಯಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕೂ ರೆಡಿ, ನಮಗೆ ಬೈಬೇಕು ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅಥವಾ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ವಿಮರ್ಶೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು, ಲೆಟ್ ನೊಬೆಲ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ ಡೂ ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ನಾವು ಯಾವುದಕ್ಕೂ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬಾರ್ದು. ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡೋದಾದರೂ ಕೂಡ ನಮ್ಮ ಕೆಲಸಗಳು ವಿದ್ವತ್ಪೂರ್ಣವಾಗಿರಬೇಕು, ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ಲಿ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದು ನಮ್ಮ ಉದ್ದೇಶ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ವಿ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಈವನ್ ಟಚ್ಡ್ ಅಪಾನ್ ಮೆನಿ ಆಫ್ ದಿ ನೊಬೆಲ್ ಲಾರಿಯೇಟ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಬೃಹದಾಸೆ ಇದೆ. ಏನಪ್ಪ ಇದು ಇಷ್ಟೊಂದು, ಏನೋ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ನಮ್ಗೆ ನೊಬೆಲ್ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಡ್ಬೇಕಂತಲ್ಲ, ಆ ಥರ ಅಂತಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಮ ಉದ್ದೇಶ ನೊಬೆಲ್ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೆ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಬಹುಶಃ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಹಕಾರ ಬೇಕು ನಮಗೆ. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಯಾರಾದರೂ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಕೈ ಜೋಡಿಸಿ ನಮಗೆ ಸಹಕಾರ ಕೊಡಿ, ಎಲ್ಲ ರೀತಿಯ ಸಹಕಾರ ಕೊಡಿ. ನಮಗೆ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನದ ಸಹಕಾರ ಬೇಕು, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಪಾಲ್ಗೊಳ್ಳುವಿಕೆಯ ಸಹಕಾರ ಬೇಕು, ಹಾಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಇವನ್ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸಸ್ ಬೇಕು ನಮಗೆ. ಅದು ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಅಥವಾ ಮೆಟೀರಿಯಲ್ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಫೈನಾನ್ಷಿಯಲ್ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಎಲ್ಲ ಥರದ ಸಹಕಾರ ನಮಗೆ ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು 3 ಜನ ಏನು ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಹೀಗಾಗಿ ಇದು ಅಲ್ಟಿಮೇಟ್ಲಿ ಇಟ್ ಶುಡ್ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ನಾವು ಇದು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಟ್ರಸ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ರಿಜಿಸ್ಟರ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕವಾಗಿ ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿಲ್ಲ ನಾವು. ವಿ ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಲೀವ್ ದಿಸ್ ಟು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್, ಲೆಟ್ ಇಟ್ ಗೋ. ಕೈಂಡ್ಲಿ cooperate with us, do whatever possible with you, or any type of resource help we need and we expect from you, and we request you kindly participate. Your participation is more important. ನಿಮ್ಮ ನಾಲೆಜ್ನ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಎಥಿಕಲ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸ್ನ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡು ನಮ್ಮೊಳಗೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದಾದರೆ ಖಂಡಿತ ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ಲಾಟ್ಫಾರ್ಮ್ ನಿಮಗೋಸ್ಕರ ಇದೆ. ನನ್ನ ಜೊತೆ ಸಹಕರಿಸಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ನಾನು ಈಗ ಮುಂದಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವಾದಂತಹ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ B.K Subba Rao ಮೆಮೋರಿಯಲ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ನ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ಇವತ್ತು ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತೆ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಇಡೀ ಇದಕ್ಕೂ ಒಂದು ಸಂಬಂಧ ಇರತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಹೆಲ್ತ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಫುಡ್ ಅನ್ನ ಮಧ್ಯವರ್ತಿಯಾಗಿ ಇಟ್ಕೊಂಡಂತ ಒಂದು ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್ ಅನ್ನ, ಸಸ್ಟೈನಿಂಗ್ ಅವರ್ ಹೆಲ್ತ್, ಇಂಟ್ರಾಕ್ಷನ್ ಆಫ್ ಡಯಟರಿ ನ್ಯೂಟ್ರಾಸ್ಯೂಟಿಕಲ್ಸ್ ವಿತ್ ದ ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ಈಗ ವಾಷಿಂಗ್ಟನ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಆಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಪುಲ್ಮನ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥವ್ರು ಈಗ ಅಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನ ನಾನು ಇವತ್ತು ಅಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋನಿದ್ದೇನೆ. ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ನನ್ನ ಹಿರಿಯ ಸ್ನೇಹಿತರು. ಮತ್ತೆ ಕಳೆದ ಒಂದು 3-4 ವರ್ಷದಲ್ಲಿ ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕ ಚರ್ಚೆಗಳನ್ನ ನಾನು ಮಾಡಿರೋರು ಯಾರು ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ನನಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು. ಅಂಡ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಬಯೋಕೆಮಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ. ಅವ್ರಿಗಿರೋ ಬಯೋಕೆಮಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿ ನಾಲೆಜ್ನ ನನಗೆ ಭಾಳ ಖುಷಿ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಹೀಸ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಅವರ್ ಕಾಲೇಜ್, ಈಸ್ ಬೇಸಿಕಲಿ ಹಾರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಗ್ರಾಜ್ಯುಯೇಟ್. ಹಾರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ಚರಿಂದ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಬಯೋಕೆಮಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಂಡು, ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ಬಯೋಕೆಮಿಸ್ಟ್ರಿಯನ್ನು ಒಳಗೊಂಡು, ಫಿಸಿಯಾಲಜಿಯನ್ನು ಬಳಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅವರು ಎಲ್ಲ ವಿಚಾರಗಳನ್ನು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡುವ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಇಷ್ಟವಾದಂಥ ಮಿತ್ರರು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಕಾರಣ ಅವರ ಗುರುಗಳು ಹಾಗೂ ನನಗೂ ಗುರುಗಳಾದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಕೃಷ್ಣಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಿ ಅವರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದರು. ಅವರು ತುಂಬಾ ಇಷ್ಟವಾದಂಥ ಒಬ್ಬ ಪ್ಲಾಂಟ್ ಫಿಸಿಯಾಲಜಿಸ್ಟ್. ಅವರ ಶಿಷ್ಯರಾದಂತಹ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ಇಂಥ ಒಂದು ಅದ್ಭುತವಾದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಆರಂಭಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಒಂದು ನಾಲೆಜೇ ಅವ್ರು ನಿಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಪರಿಚಯಿಸುತ್ತೆ. ನಾನು ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗಿಲ್ಲ, ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಕನ್ನಡಿಗರೇ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಆರಂಭಿಸ್ತಾ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಚರ್ಚೆಯನ್ನು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ಬಯೋಕೆಮಿಕ್ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಸೈಂಟಿಫಿಕ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ, ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗೋದ್ರಿಂದ, ಮತ್ತು ಅವರು ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಬಳಕೆಯಲ್ಲಿರೋ ಪ್ರದೇಶ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಆಗಿರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಧ್ಯೆ ಮಧ್ಯೆ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿಗೂ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಉತ್ತರ ಹೇಳಿ ನಾನು ಇರ್ತೇನೆ. ಕೊನೆಗೆ ಚರ್ಚೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಂದುವರ್ಸೋಣ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರು ತಮ್ಮ ವಿಶಿಷ್ಟವಾದಂಥ ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಆಹಾರವನ್ನು ಬೆಳೆಯೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಹಿಡಿದು ಅದರ ಒಳಗಡೆ ಆಗುವ ಬಯೋಕೆಮಿಕಲ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸು, ಮತ್ತು ಅದು ತಿಂದ ಮೇಲೆ ನಮಗಾಗುವ ಬಯೋಕೆಮಿಕಲ್ ಇಶ್ಯೂಸು, ಕೊನೆಗೆ ಅದು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೀವಕೋಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ರೀತಿ ಅಸಿಮಿಲೇಟ್ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಯಾವ ಆ ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ ಅದೇ ನ್ಯೂಟ್ರಾಸ್ಯೂಟಿಕಲ್ಸ್ ವಿತ್ ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ಸ್ ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಬಿಯಾಂಡ್ ಪ್ರೋಟೀನ್ಸ್, ಬಿಯಾಂಡ್ ಫ್ಯಾಟ್, ಬಿಯಾಂಡ್ ಕಾರ್ಬೋಹೈಡ್ರೇಟ್, ದೇರ್ ಆರ್ ಮೆನಿ ಅದರ್ ಕೆಮಿಕಲ್ಸ್. ಅವುಗಳ ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ಗಳೇನು, ಅವುಗಳ ಗುರಿ ಏನು, ಅವು ಹೇಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಒಳಗೆ, ಅದನ್ನೆಲ್ಲ ಅವ್ರು ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡೋರಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಆ ಮೂಲಕ ಅವ್ರು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚಿನ ಪರಿಚಯ ಆಗ್ತಾರೆ. ಮುಂದೆ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ನನಗೆ ಆಶ್ವಾಸನೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅವ್ರು, ಏನಂತಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಯಾವುದೇ ಕೇಳುಗರು ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸಂಪರ್ಕ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಈ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೋದು. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ಎ ಮೋರ್ ವೆರಿ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಆಸ್ಪೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಟುಡೇಸ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ನಮ್ಮ ಒಂಥರ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ ಕಾಂಟಿನೆಂಟಲ್ ಆಗುವ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಕನ್ನಡದ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆಯನ್ನು ಬಳಸ್ತಾ ನಾನು ನಿಮ್ಗೀಗ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ವಾಷಿಂಗ್ಟನ್ ಸ್ಟೇಟ್ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಯ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವ್ರ ಕಡೆ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸೊ ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತ. ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರೇ, ತಾವು ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಮುಂದುವರಿಸಬಹುದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ನಾನು ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತಿಸಿ ನನ್ನ ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನ ಮುಗಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
ತುಂಬಾ ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ಸ್ ತನ್ನೇಶ್. ಐ ಶುಡ್ ರಿಯಲಿ ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಅಂಡ್ ಆಲ್ ದಿ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸೇಷನ್. ನನಗೆ ಅಭಿಮಾನದಿಂದ ಕರೆದು ಇಂಥ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅಂತ ಉನ್ನತ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿ ಮೆಮೋರಿಯಲ್ ಲೆಕ್ಚರಲ್ಲಿ ನೀವು ಮಾತಾಡಿ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳಿದ್ದೀರಾ, ಬಹಳ ಸಂತೋಷ. ಆದರೆ ಒಂದು ನನಗನ್ನಿಸೋದು, ನಾನು ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನಿನೂ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಆಹಾರ ವಿಜ್ಞಾನಿನೂ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಇಂಥವನು ಹೇಗೆ ಇದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಲಿ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಹಿಂದೆ ಮುಂದೆ ನೋಡಬೇಕಾಯ್ತು. ಆದರೂ ನನಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆಯೋ ಆ ವಿಚಾರ ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ. ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗಾಗಲೇ ನಾನೇನು ಹೇಳ್ತೀನಿ ಅನ್ನೋ ವಿಚಾರನ ತನ್ನೇಶ್ ಹೇಳ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾನು ಫುಲ್ ಟಾಕನ್ನು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲೇ ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಸಾರಿ. So this talk on sustaining our health, interaction of dietary nutraceuticals with their targets. With once I say target, okay. When I say targets, I am simply taking cellular targets on the cell. So this is whatever I say is here is some disclaimers. It is not intended to serve as a guide for treating disease, because I'm not a medical doctor. That's not my intention here. And it's not a part of my research. So I don't do any research in either in medical field or in nutraceuticals or in food science or anything like that. So now you know you are stuck with me for an hour with a person who is not an expert in this field. So the products that I present here as pictures are just for illustrative purpose. I'm not endorsing any of those products. And then, as I say, I have collected a lot of information from mostly peer-reviewed scientific publications and online resources, and I have put it in a frame so that I can make it presentable. Okay. ಸಂಕ್ಷಿಪ್ತವಾಗಿ ನನಗೆ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಹೇಳಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಸಂಕ್ಷಿಪ್ತವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ, ನಾವು ತಿನ್ನುವಂಥ ಹಣ್ಣು, ತರಕಾರಿ ಮತ್ತೆ ಸಾಂಬಾರು, ಕೆಲವೊಂದು ಸ್ಪೈಸಸ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಬೋಹೈಡ್ರೇಟ್ಸ್, ಪ್ರೋಟೀನ್ಸ್, ಫ್ಯಾಟ್ಸ್, ವೈಟಮಿನ್ಸ್, ಮಿನರಲ್ಸ್ ಇಂಥವೆಲ್ಲ ಇದೆ. ಅದರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಪ್ರಮಾಣದಲ್ಲಿ, ಅಲ್ಪ ಪ್ರಮಾಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವು ರಾಸಾಯನಿಕಗಳಿವೆ. ಅದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಆರೋಗ್ಯವರ್ಧಕಗಳು ಅಥವಾ ರೋಗ ನಿರೋಧಕಗಳು ಅಂತ ಕರಿತೀವಿ. ಇಂಥ ಆರೋಗ್ಯವರ್ಧಕ, ರೋಗ ನಿರೋಧಕಗಳು ಅಲ್ಪ ಪ್ರಮಾಣದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ರೂ ಅದರ ಪ್ರಭಾವ ಅಲ್ಪದಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಅವು ಜೀವಕೋಶದ ಮೇಲೆ ಬೀರೋ ಪ್ರಭಾವದಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ರಕ್ಷಣೆಗೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಅವು ಸಹಕಾರಿಯಾಗಿದೆ. ಅಂತ ಆರೋಗ್ಯವನ್ನು ಕೊಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ಅದು ಜೀವಕೋಶದ ಮೇಲೆ ಹೇಗೆ ಪರಿಣಾಮ ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಜೀವಕೋಶಗಳು ಇಂಥ ಕೆಮಿಕಲ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ಹೆಂಗೆ ಅವಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರತಿಕ್ರಿಯೆ ಕೊಡುತ್ತೆ, ಅದನ್ನ ನಾನು ಇವತ್ತು ಹೇಳಕ್ ಹೊರಟಿರೋದು. So these are called nutraceuticals, those chemicals that are useful for giving certain health benefits. So if you look at the definition, is one of the definitions by the National Nutraceutical Center at Clemson University. It's defined as food or parts of food that provide medical or health benefits, including prevention and treatment of disease. And then what are the sources of such chemicals? We have already brought it out. It's plants are the major source. And the question is, why do plants produce these nutraceuticals? Why do these plants produce chemicals of this kind? So plants produce nutraceuticals, or these phytochemicals, in response to certain stress. Okay, like the stress could be biotic. Biotic means that it's caused by a living organism, or abiotic, which is caused by a non-living organism. So in case of a biotic stress, it could be a fungal infection or viral infection or a bacterial infection. So in response to such infection, the plants produce certain compounds. So there could be a number of compounds. I'm not going to read them out. And also in response to stress of various kinds, like salinity or water deficit or light or temperature or even heavy metals, they also the plants respond to them in providing certain chemicals, which we call it as secondary metabolites, and they have nutraceutical value. So plants also produce this to attract certain predators. You know, if the plant is infected by a disease-causing organism or by an insect, it will attract its enemies through production of secondary metabolites, which can be volatile and attract its enemies. So there is a whole lot of ecological reasons for producing these nutraceuticals. And one very important thing is they are produced in response to certain stress factors. It could be a disease or it could be a abiotic stress. And interestingly, these compounds that plants produce to defend themselves for various reasons have also become useful for us in providing certain fragrances or agrochemicals or flavoring agents or some pharmaceuticals. Okay, so if you look at this, you can look at plant from a different perspective. It is a chemical factory. The only good thing about this chemical factory is it is environmentally friendly and non-polluting, and it is sustainable because it depends on the ultimate source of energy, that is the sun. So there is a lot of interest in nutraceuticals, as you can see. there's a lot of books. They have gone into looking at genomics, proteomics, and metabolomics of current topics in nutraceutical research, and the Journal of Nutraceuticals and Herbal Medicine, and dietary supplements, and current nutraceuticals, and Journal of Nutraceuticals and Food Science, and Journal of Medical Nutrition and Nutraceuticals. So the interest in nutraceuticals is really growing. So now, this slide shows you, just to summarize what exactly I'm going to talk. Again, you got a glimpse of it already. We have fruits, vegetables, and spices. And they produce nutraceuticals. So how do we define nutraceuticals? They are components other than carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, and minerals. And they are involved as cell signaling molecules. Okay. And then these signaling molecules interact with cell components. And these components are specifically located on cell membrane. As you can see here is a red star. These are the cell membrane. These receptors are located here, or in the cytoplasm, or inside the nucleus. So these are the three places where there are targets for the nutraceuticals. And the response by the cell, in response to the signals, the cell produces certain responses which will help it either sustain function, or in the absence of it, it can go the other way and derailing its normal function. So here, what are these targets? I just now brought out these targets are located on the plasma membrane or the cell membrane, or inside the cell in the cytoplasm, or inside the nucleus. Okay. So here are the cell components. So here are the 4 cell components. My entire lecture I will be talking about these events. One is known as the transcription factor, or abbreviated as TF, or tumor necrosis factor, programmed cell death, inflammation, and angiogenesis. So if you don't understand what they mean, I'm going to explain it to you, but all my lecture will be on these events. So out of which the cell, when I say cell components, they are the transcription factors and tumor necrosis factors, and the rest are biochemical events. So what we have to see in the rest of the lecture is to understand what are these factors and how do the nutraceuticals specifically interact with these factors. So now, so what are transcription factors? Transcription factors are protein found in the cytoplasm of the cell. So what do? They bind to the specific DNA sequences, or the DNA, and cause gene expression, or which we call it as transcription. That is why it's called a transcription factor. Okay? And then there are as many as 1,600 transcription factors in humans. And one of them, of these transcription factors, for those who did not catch me what transcription factors are, they are just proteins. They help in expressing the gene or activating a gene. That is all what it is. And they are present in the cytoplasm. And one of such transcription factor, is known as nuclear transcription factor, or NF-kappa B. You will see that this particular nuclear transcription factor, or NF-kappa B, plays a very crucial role in a number of cellular events, and that is why it has become very important. And it was discovered in 1986 by Ranjan Sen and David Baltimore. Here are the pictures of Ranjan Sen and David Baltimore. David Baltimore received Nobel Prize in 1975 for another important work which involves viral replication. And this nuclear transcription factor is present in all animal cells, which includes us. Okay, I would say, and it's active. NF-kappa B transcribes over 150 target genes. Why this is so important? You can see the number of genes it can target. The number here is 150, but I have seen some papers it's 180, and in some papers I've seen up to 500 genes it can transcribe. So if one factor can control, target, and activate close to 150 genes, you can see what kind of a havoc it can do to the cell biochemistry, cell physiology, and also if they are involved in diseases, it can turn on the disease. So this is a very important protein in the cell. And activation is associated with disorders if, fortunately, the nuclear transcription factor remains as an inactive protein in the cell, which is good. But when once it is activated, it leads to various diseases like asthma, arthritis, cancer, inflammation, etc. So it's very important to note these are non-pathological diseases. There is no disease-causing organism involved in it. These are physiological disorders. Okay, these are very difficult to control. For example, diabetes. There is no disease-causing organism in it. It is a physiological disorder. So the NF-kappa B activation is a dangerous game. So it's constitutively expressed and active in cancer cells. So I had to tell you what constitutive expression means. It means, I said this particular nuclear transcription factor is inactive and remains as inactive in most cells, okay? But in cancer cells, it remains active all the time. That means, that is why we say it is constitutively expressed. So what are the activators of nuclear transcription factor? That is what we want to know. Then we can control this beast going out of control, right? So activators are tumor necrosis factor. Now I had to tell you what tumor necrosis factor is, and I'll get back to you on that. Free radicals, okay? Free radical damage can activate this transcription factor. Viral and bacterial antigens can do the same thing. And it's a major target of drug development. Okay? You see, if you go online and in PubMed Central, if you go to see how many citations are there in one protein called nuclear transcription factor, you get 126,000 papers published on it to date. So that should tell you the importance of this. So I'll have another thing to show you how important it is. Here is, they went all the way to look at the X-ray crystallographic structure of this protein. And here you see the X-ray crystallographic structure of the NF-kappa B, its protein, and its interaction with the circular thing is the nucleic acid. It is interacting with the nucleic acid. So now we are convinced that this is a very important protein and it plays a major role. So how does it really work? What makes it work and what makes it not work? Here is, the picture looks very cumbersome, complicated, but it is not really so. All that I'm showing you here is a cell. And here is the structure of a cell, and this is the cell membrane, and this is the nucleus, and this is the nuclear membrane. Okay, and the cell and the nucleus remains in two different compartments by virtue of having a membrane surrounding it. Okay, so now let us say here is a receptor to which a TNF-alpha, or the tumor necrosis factor alpha, which I had to tell you still, and free radicals or any carcinogen, a chemical carcinogen. Let us say it binds it to that. So what is the consequence of that? Consequence of that is there is an enzyme called phosphorylase that activates, and here is the NF-kappa B, or the nuclear transcription factor kappa B, and as you can see, there are three different proteins, and there's one protein with three different peptides or small proteins. So one of them, which is shown here with an arrow mark, is an inhibitory protein, which means when the inhibitory protein is attached to the NF-kappa B, it is inactive. So I told you we have to control the activation of NF-kappa B. How do we control it? We have to keep this inhibitory domain intact. We should not let it go. So then it remains harmless. But what happens when once a carcinogen binds, there is a signal given to it, and this particular inhibitory particle or inhibitory domain gets phosphorylated, which means it adds phosphate groups. So anything with a phosphate group is a target for a protease or an enzyme that degrades it. So now what happens is this particular inhibitory domain is degraded, and then we have this activated protein. Now it can cross through the nucleus, get into the DNA, binds to the place which is known as the response elements, which is RE here, and then this will transcribe new mRNA or the messenger RNA, and this messenger RNA will now produce new proteins. What kind of proteins does it produce? It produces pro-inflammatory proteins, which causes inflammation. And then they produce proliferative proteins, and then anti-apoptotic genes. So I'll explain this as you go further, you will get more of this. Once I say proliferative means it will help the cell multiply. So we are trying to, so this reaction is making a protein from a normal state get into an immortal state. It keeps multiplying. So when that happens, an uncontrolled multiplication of cell is a tumor. That is exactly what happens once it becomes proliferative. So now it's very clear. You activate the NF-kappa B, it can go into the DNA, transcribe genes, produce proteins that can be harmful. So now, what if we can prevent this phosphorylation or addition of phosphate? So therefore, it will never be degraded, and therefore the NF-kappa B remains in an inactive state. We can maintain it in an inactive state. How do we do that? There are certain drugs. They are called phosphorylation inhibitor. There is a whole lot of these drugs sold in the market. That is the purpose of that. So here is a paper to show you. There are so many papers, I just put one. Modulation of NF-kappa B signaling as a therapeutic target for autoimmunity. So many autoimmune diseases because the NF-kappa B is activated. And then it says, can NF-kappa be considered a valid drug target in neoplastic diseases? Our point of view. There are very interesting papers published on this. And here is a plant-derived inhibitor. Then not only drugs, we have plant-derived inhibitors of NF-kappa B. So what are those? There is a whole lot of them. So here is I'm not going to read all these chemicals. All these chemicals come from plants. They are all NF-kappa B inhibitors. And what activates it? A number of things: viruses, fungus, oxidative stress, chemotherapeutic drugs, gamma radiation, heavy metals, vitogens, hormones, glucose, and obesity, cytokines, and bacteria, environmental pollutants, and so on and so forth, and tobacco, alcohol. All of them activate, they target only NF-kappa B. That should clearly emphasize the role played by NF-kappa B in disease progression. It's a very interesting thing. I almost, when I was writing this, I was correcting Sanesh's article on kitchen alchemy. It's a very interesting article. You should read this article. Here, what I'm trying to say is, how did our people know that they have to incorporate all these into curry powder? Not telling they knew about NF-kappa B, but somehow this is a great invention, in my opinion, of making a curry powder which has got chemicals which inhibit NF-kappa B activation. That's in eugenol in clove, or a cinnamaldehyde in cinnamon, and anethole in coriander, and capsaicin in chilies. And again, we have cuminaldehyde in cumin, and diosgenin in fenugreek seeds, and cinegreen in mustard, and piperine in black pepper. Now that's about NF-kappa B. I hope I made it clear. And then we go to the next component of the cell in which the phytochemicals or the nutraceuticals interact. This is called the tumor necrosis factor, or the TNF. And this activates NF-kappa B that we have already told. What is this tumor necrosis factor? It is a cytokine. So when once I use the word cytokine, it simply means it's a cell signaling protein. Okay. And the TNF expression, when it is local, it has therapeutic role. Okay. When it is unregulated expression, it causes metabolic disorder. Okay. So what I want to say is this TNF, or the tumor necrosis factor, is like a double-edged sword. Okay. It has got a therapeutic role, and it has also got a role to cause metabolic disorder. The TNF was discovered in 1965. When they discovered it, they found out that it has got the ability to regress tumors, okay, or suppress tumor growth. Therefore, they called it as tumor necrosis factor. And subsequently, in 1985, Bharat Agarwal, and they showed that this has got also an ability to cause tumor growth. So that is how now we know that it's a double-edged sword. This one is endogenously expressed in cancer cells. So it's always present in cancer cells. And what do? They cause inflammation. Okay. And the gene expression, again, NF-kappa B in turn helps in expression of tumor necrosis factor. And there are 395,000 citations on this showing the importance of this protein in cell biology. And I don't have to go into details of this. It's not important. This is just the X-ray crystallographic structure of this protein. And so now what I have here, okay, now it's better. Okay, here I'm showing you this tumor necrosis factor. What I'm talking about is a target for production of number of drugs. So here is a list of FDA approved. So what I'm trying to say is this tumor necrosis factor alpha, which I called a double-edged sword, and it is had some role to play in tumor regression, but we also know that it has a role to play in tumor promotion as well, and also with a number of different diseases. Here is a list of FDA approved drugs, alpha inhibitory drugs, and you don't want to read all the names. So what I want to say is most of these drugs, if you look at it, they end up with the last three letters MAB. So here, adalimumab, for example. So last word MAB simply means it's a monoclonal antibody. That's what it means. So now they have these drugs are monoclonal antibodies. They bind to the tumor necrosis factor to inactivate them. So that is the whole role. And if you look at here, the TNF inhibitory drug market, you will be surprised that it is 42 billion. It's expected to grow to 42 billion in 2026. So that should clearly tell you the importance of this TNF alpha and its role in diseases. So the next factor that I want to talk about is a process known as apoptosis. Apoptosis simply means programmed cell death. Okay. So what does that programmed cell death mean? Let us say, for example, there are some normal cells and they become damaged or become abnormal. You can't afford to have an abnormal cell going around and multiplying. 'It can create problems such as cancer. So what happens is, this cell death, this process, 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 this So there is a very well established function in the cell that takes care of this normal cell and puts through a process known as the apoptotic pathway and or the programmed cell death. And there are certain enzymes, they are known as executioner caspases. They execute those cells and they degrade their nuclear cells, the repair enzymes and cytoskeleton, and they kill those cells. So that is the function. That's very desirable function. Otherwise, you will lead to an immortality of damaged cells and abnormal cells and creates a major issue. And if the NF-kappa B is activated, it turns on anti-apoptotic genes, which means they overcome this pathway and they make the cells survive. And now these damaged cells survive, proliferate, leading to carcinogenesis or development of cancer. Okay, so here is another place, the NF-kappa B, how it regulates and what role it plays in the initiation of converting a normal cell into a cancerous cell. And here is another process of the cellular process that is equally important. When I say membrane phospholipids, these are the lipids or the fat that is present in the cell membrane. They can be degraded by an enzyme called phospholipase A2, and it releases what is known as arachidonic acid, which is just a fat, and that acted upon by two enzymes, a lipoxygenase or cyclooxygenase, they produce leukotrienes and prostaglandins, and these two cause inflammation. So you are, by producing these prostaglandins and leukotrienes from the membrane lipids of the fat, you are creating an inflammatory reaction. Inflammation is desirable to some extent, but if it is chronic, then it is a problem. It can lead to cardiovascular diseases, cancer, diabetes, pancreatitis, autoimmune diseases, arthritis, and renal disease, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at it on the Time magazine, there is a secret killer. They bring about inflammation as a secret killer, and they list out all these diseases. And the aspirin that you take is actually an inhibitor of cyclooxygenase. That is how it can overcome inflammation. And there are various books, The Inflammation Nation. And it's a very interestingly, the word itis, I-T-I-S here, this word itis, it means inflammation. So look at it, bronchitis, itis, is an inflammation disease. Arthritis, itis, is an inflammation disease. Meningitis, inflammation of the brain. Appendicitis, inflammation of the appendix. Then hepatitis, is the inflammation of the liver. And nephritis is the inflammation of the kidneys. And pancreatitis is inflammation of the pancreas. And sinusitis, and the tendinitis, dermatitis, all ends with itis. These are the root cause of most of these is the inflammation. And if you look, just type in inflammation and disease, you will see around 913,000 publications on this topic. You can make a whole list of diseases ending with itis. They're all inflammatory diseases. And there are a whole lot of books published on this topic. The inflammation syndrome, inflammation spectrum, anti-inflammatory diet, and of course there was turmeric, and then inflammation, fundamental mechanism, the inflamed mind, and inflammation cell signaling. That's what we're talking about now, and Journal of Inflammation. So here is Harvard Health Publishing, Harvard Medical School. They say doctors are learning that one of the best ways to reduce inflammation lies not in the medicine cabinet, but in the refrigerator. By following the anti-inflammatory diet, we can fight off inflammation for good. So it shows that controlling inflammation is a key to solving a number of diseases. So the next process I want to talk about is what is known as angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is simply formation of new blood vessels. It's a terminology saying formation of new blood vessels. So here is an example of a blood vessel, and here is some of the cells that are dividing. Let us say this is a cancerous cell. They produce certain compounds known as the vesicular endothelial growth factors, which is abbreviated as VEGF, and these attract the blood vessels to develop from the lumen of the blood vessel. New blood vessels are formed in response to vesicular endothelial growth factors. So that is what you're seeing here. And finally, when the tumor is connected with a new blood vessel, the tumor is supplied very heavily with the blood, and these tumor cells start growing, and it becomes an uncontrolled tumor. And if you look at on angiogenesis, there are 301,000 publications this topic. And so what are these? I told you there are some, one of the things I told you is vesicular endothelial growth factor, and these growth factors are involved in making the new blood vessel, okay? And if you look at here, the total number of publications on angiogenesis, or the formation of new blood vessels, there are around 301,000 publications on it. And if you look at VEGF itself, it's 40% of the publications are dedicated to vesicular endothelial growth factor. So that shows the importance of this one peptide that plays a very crucial role in the development of new blood vessels connecting to the tumor growth. So now how do we control the tumor? And then if you look at here, these are a number of drugs, FDA approved drugs in the market to prevent angiogenesis. So now, what are the dietary phytochemicals? So do we have any plant-based chemicals? For example, you can see, I don't want to go into the entire pathway here, but I want to show you which are all the ones that control vesicular endothelial growth factors. We have a number of them. Nobiletin is from citrus, gallic acid, resveratrol from grapes, lutein, and curcumin, of course, from turmeric, and epichlorocatechin gallate from green tea, and apigenin, naringenin. These are all, I will show you in another slide where these are all plant-based. Then you have curcumin, nobiletin, quercetin. They attack at different places in the angiogenesis pathway. So now, there are drugs to control or to suppress the development of new blood vessels, or the development of the angiogenesis as a process. So what happens if you do that? So here is a problem. The development, the insufficient angiogenesis, if you knock off the angiogenesis completely, then you are risking heart and brain problems, because it can affect the heart and brain, and you can get into chronic wounds, because the wounds require new blood vessels to go there and heal the wound, and you can get into ulcers, infertility, placental disorders, because there is a blood to the placenta, going through the placenta can be a problem, and certain the skin diseases can be a problem. And if you have an excessive angiogenesis, you can get into cancer and ocular disorders, and psoriasis, and rheumatoid arthritis, and AIDS, and other complications. For those who want to know more about this, here is a reference. And it's simply a list of the food and the active principles in that are anti-angiogenic foods. So here is more examples of anti-VEGF or anti-vesicular endothelial growth factor chemicals. Here's a green tea, gallic acid or epigallocatechin gallate from green tea, and Nigella sativa or the black caraway seeds, and I think this is also known as kalonji. They contain thymoquinoline. They have a anti-VEGF activity. Celery, parsley, chamomile, and artichoke, they have apigenin, which do the same thing. Piperine, black pepper does it. naringenin in grapefruit skin, that it does the same thing. And lycopene in tomato can do work as an anti-VEGF phytochemical. So this is a very interesting thing. Here is curcumin or turmeric, So what I have seen is these are the various targets for curcumin. COX-2 is a cyclooxygenase. These are all involved in either anti-inflammatory or anti-cancer, pathway, in cancer pathway. If you look at it in curcumin and cyclooxygenase, there are so many papers published, and this is the actual drugs that are sold in the market to control the same process, which the curcumin also can target the same pathway. And if you look at how many papers are published, there is a decent number of papers published by curcumin as well. While these chemicals are monotargeted, their target is one and only one. But curcumin has a multi-targeted approach. It can control a number of biochemical events in the cell. And here is a Band-Aid with turmeric, once sold by Johnson & Johnson. And here is a list of clinical trials done on turmeric on various, here is the clinical trial identification number, and here is for the various conditions, and where it is done, which university, and whether it is in phase 1 or 2 or 3, whatever. It's showing the importance of curcumin. So then we go into another chemical, which is interesting as well. It is known as resveratrol. And it's interestingly, it works as a caloric restriction mimetic, which means a resveratrol behaves as if you are fasting. Okay, so what does fasting do to you? Is that causes what is known as caloric restriction. So what does caloric restriction do? So when you reduce the amount of carbohydrates you take, it does something to an enzyme called serotonin. This is the gene, either caloric restriction or resveratrol will activate serotonin 1 gene. This is a very interesting gene that helps in mitochondrial biogenesis. It makes multiply mitochondria, and then it reduces oxidative stress, and it makes enhanced insulin growth factor signaling. So we have, just by fasting, we have done a great thing to regenerate the mitochondria. So here is a little cartoon for you. It says hundreds of years of medical progress, and all you can tell me is to eat less. Okay. So here is a book, Caloric Restriction, Aging and Longevity. If you look at the number of publications, there is a rapid increase in the interest in resveratrol. Resveratrol is present in red grapes, red skin, in this grape skin, or in cranberries, even the red peanut skin. The skin has lots of resveratrol in it. And if you look at it, the discovery happened in around 1940s. They identified the presence of resveratrol, and the interest after 90s increased, and now we have 64,000 publications on resveratrol and its nutraceutical effects. And I did not put this slide just to annoy you with a whole lot of biochemical synthesis. All that I just want to tell you here is here is a grape, a healthy one, and a grape infected with botrytis, which is a fungus. So why I'm showing you that is the infection to the plant by this fungus makes the plant produce, a systemic production of resveratrol in itself as a defense. It's a defense compound. So my question is, if we grow a grape healthier without any infection or any whatsoever, clean and nice, looks good, but does it have much resveratrol? Probably not, because it requires a stimulus or an elicitor to produce those chemicals. So let's not worry about the biosynthetic pathway here. And here I'm showing you the resveratrol they sell resveratrol as capsules. So again, a whole lot of biochemistry. We're not interested in the entire biochemistry. All that you have to see here is caloric restriction or resveratrol does the same thing. It activates a gene called serotonin hydroxylase, and this causes mitochondrial regenesis, or the multiplication of mitochondria. Here it is noted as mitochondrial biogenesis, and it causes, it helps in metabolic disorders like diabetes and obesity. It reduces hypertension and mitochondrial disorders and even neurological disorders. It's a very interesting paper I saw recently in 2019, where they showed they took the gene from the peanut that produces this, it's called the stilbene synthase gene. And this gene is involved in the coding for resveratrol synthesis. They put it in the rice. The rice grains now has more resveratrol in it, and they fed this rice to Drosophila melanogaster and looked for its longevity. So interestingly, they could identify an extension of its lifespan and alleviation of aging symptoms, like reduced locomotive deterioration, and body weight gain was reduced, because it didn't become obese, and eye degeneration or the macular degeneration was reduced, and neurodegeneration was also reduced. And even on resveratrol rice itself, there are 2,491 citations. And here I get into another type of compound called sulforaphanes. These compounds are common in most of the cruciferous vegetables, which means they belong to mustard family, like broccoli, watercress, and radish, kohlrabi, mustard, cabbage, and Brussels sprouts, and so on and so forth. They have this chemical called glucoraphanin. Glucoraphanin, when you chew it, gets degraded to something called sulforaphane. This is this compound that we are interested in. I'll tell you what it does. Again, a very elaborate pathway. Don't have to be annoyed by this. All that I'm trying to say is sulforaphanes have an ability to prevent the accumulation of carcinogens or cancer-causing compounds to the DNA, and it prevents the DNA adduct formation. And it can also facilitate the excretion of carcinogens by combining it and making it as inactive metabolite. So when the sulforaphane combines with a carcinogen, it gets excreted. So that is another protection. It also prevents angiogenesis. We just talked about angiogenesis, it's the formation of new blood vessels. That it can reduce. And then there also attack metalloproteinases, which are involved in metastasis and the cancer formation. So they also are also involved in apoptosis, or programmed cell death by activating certain of the cell components. So this slide shows you that sulforaphanes can intercept from normal cell to metastasis, or at different stages of metastasis. So they can attack angiogenesis, it can prevent promotion or initiation, progression, and metastasis. And if you look at the number of citations here, there are 8,935 citations on total citations on sulforaphane, and on cancer itself, there are 7,338, accounting for 82%, which is sulforaphane is a very important compound which has been worked extensively on cancer. And here is some more information on sulforaphanes. And here is the structure of the glucobrasinin. When you chew on it, and the hydrolysis releases what is known as the indole carbinol, and indole carbinol in stomach acid. In stomach, it's unstable. It becomes a dimer, but then it forms what is known as diindolyl methane, and this has got anti-cancer ability. So here, what I decided to do is I wanted to make how many publications exist on different compounds found in the plant. Some examples. For example, here I'm taking tomato. The compound is lycopene in it. And if you look at the inhibition of tumor necrosis factor, there are so many papers. And the NF-kappa B inhibition, there are so many papers. And then cyclooxygenase, which causes inflammation reactions, there are so many papers on it. And vesicular endothelial growth factors, which is involved in development of new blood vessels, so many publications. And apoptosis, which is a programmed cell death, and there are so many papers on that. So like that, you can go on. And in citrus, you have routine. You can, now I'm not going to read the number of publications. It's not important. I just wanted to show you there are a sizable number of publications on all of these compounds. And here it's the same story on anise spices, star anise, clove, grape. And if you look at that is the actual cellular targets. And here look at the diseases. Here is the on prostate disease. There are so many papers that lycopene can do on breast cancer, colon cancer, and even on Alzheimer's disease. So here this I picked out from Time magazine in 2011. It says, it turns out you really can eat your way to a better health. Among people whose genes put them at high risk for heart attack, those who ate more fruits and vegetables were half as likely to have a heart attack over a 4-year period as those who didn't eat as much produce. Here you look at this. Nowadays there is a tendency that anything you find out it has come values the nutraceutical or as a functional food ends up as a capsule. It's rather unfortunate. You can see sulforaphane ending up as a capsule, epigallocatechin gallets from green tea, or di-indolyl methane, or resveratrol, indole carbinol, curcumin, pomegranate, and L-pigenin, pycnogenol. This is from the grape seed, and citrus bioflavonoids, and here is a capsaicin gel as a painkiller. So this is my problem here. We are converting a very tasty food into a capsule, which is unpleasant. And now what we have done is we have circumvented the involvement of tongue, and therefore there is no communication with the brain. And also from the GI tract, when it is full, it sends out a signal to the brain through a hormone called cholecystokinin, and we are circumventing all that. So in addition, what we are doing here is, we are telling that it's a value-added product, but in reality, I don't know what value it has got. Here is a reduced availability for fresh consumption is a potential risk, because it can be diverted to wherever the farmers get more money, and finally ends up as a capsule with a due date printed on it, or an expiry date printed on it. And potential loss of active ingredients during processing, that we have no idea. We might lose some of these ingredients during processing itself. And the instability or loss of active ingredients over time. So that is another risk by doing that. And this slide I put it in to show that there are only 5 to 10% of the genes that are involved in number of diseases of cancer, for example, breast, melanoma, prostate, kidney, and so on and so forth. 90 to 95% of the diseases are because of our interaction with the environment. And here is a statement. I'm sure most of you know John Craig Venture. He is the person who was from cellular genomics, and he was the one who was involved in sequencing the entire human genome. And he says genes are absolutely not our fate. So why does he say that? Genes are absolutely not our fate. Our biology is very complicated, dealing with hundreds and thousands of independent factors. And it is going to take a long time to sort it out at the pace things are moving. Genes can give us useful information about the increased risk for disease, but in most cases, they will not determine the actual cause of the disease or the actual incidence of somebody getting it. Most biology will come from the complex interactions from the proteins and cells working with environmental factors, not driven directly by the genetic code. With this, I stop here. I'll take any questions. I'm again thankful to you for your attention and for the organizers here who gave me this opportunity. So you can ask me the questions. And as I said, I'm not an expert in this field. I am just a messenger and not a messiah. I'll try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. Otherwise, I'll write down your questions and find the answer.
Okay, sir, thank you, sir. Akash, you can take over. Any questions from participants, please put it in the chat box or you can ask directly.
Professor Mohan, sir, you may stop the screen sharing now, sir.
Stop? Okay.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಮೋಹನ್ ಸರ್, ತುಂಬಾ ಬಹಳ ವಿಚಾರಪೂರ್ಣ ಆಗಿತ್ತು. ನನ್ನ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ, ಈ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಷನ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಅಥವಾ ಟಾರ್ಗೆಟ್ಸ್ ಅದ್ರ ತೊಂದರೆ ಆಗೋ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ತೊಂದರೆನ ನಾವು ಈಗ ನೀವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರಿ, ಆದ್ರೆ ಆ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಷನ್ ಫ್ಯಾಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಒಳ್ಳೇದಾಗೋ ರೀತಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಕ್ಕಿದೆ ಬಾಡಿಯಲ್ಲಿ, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಫಾರ್ ವಾಟ್ ರೀಸನ್ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದೇರ್?
It is there. These are all, for example, if there is a cell that is infected, right? Or for example, let us say a hypersensitivity reaction ಅಂತ ಏನಾದರೂ ಇನ್ಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆದಾಗ ಅದರ ಆ ಇನ್ಫೆಕ್ಷನ್ ಮುಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ಪ್ರೆಡ್ ಆಗಬಾರ್ದು. ಸೊ ಅದರ ಸರೌಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಸೆಲ್ಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಟು ಬಿ ಕಿಲ್ಡ್, ರೈಟ್? ಸೊ that is where it plays a role. When it is tightly regulated, it kills those surrounding cells. It prevents further infection. When that doesn't happen, then it goes out of control.
ಓಕೆ, ಮತ್ತೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕ್ವಶನ್, ಈ ರೋಲ್ ಆಫ್ chemicals for producing the crops, whether those things have any effect on production of these phytochemicals, because you told about biotic and abiotic stress.
Yeah.
Whether it also becomes a part of that?
I don't know whether any chemicals that we spray on it, like pesticide, you mean, right?
Correct.
So whether they trigger any phytochemical, but they may. But the problem is we have so much of pesticide in relation to the phytochemical that is produced. The phytochemical or the nutraceutical may not be adequate enough to do anything.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, chat box question ಇದೆ. Can we address congenital diseases or ailments effectively through photonic chemicals, nutraceuticals, or their clinical trials in this regard? Chat box ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು question ಇದೆ sir.
Yeah. I do not really know the answer correctly for that. The congenital defects are an entirely different story. That is most likely maybe tricky. For example, if it is related to production of a lot of free radicals or something like that, that can be addressed. But otherwise, the congenital defects could be very tricky to address. That's my feeling.
Any other questions from the audience side? ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಯಾರು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಂಗಿದ್ರೆ ಅನ್ಮ್ಯೂಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಕೇಳಿ.
Yes, sir. I am Manjunath here, sir.
ಕೇಳಿ.
Sir, normally there are so many brands of nutraceuticals on the market. They promote it as an immediate and instant relief material for the abnormalities. But what I understand from the science is, whatever the intake of whether it is a nutraceutical or whether it is a pharmaceutical, it has to reach to the cell and the cell has to start the activation to give out to release the required therapeutic properties. But in this aspect, these nutraceuticals normally, how many days it will take to react from the cell?
Yeah, those things are not easy to answer. How quickly they work, or whether they work in they cross the stomach, acid barrier and get into the cell. How many days it takes? It depends on the kind of the nutraceutical. It can cross through the blood-brain barrier, or it can go through the lipid membrane, or is it a lipophilic compound or a water-soluble compound, or whether it can go into the liver and can get detoxified. For example, curcumin. They say curcumin is good, but it gets deactivated in the liver. So they recommend that you take curcumin along with piperine, which overcomes that problem. So there are interactions like that. It is really difficult to give specific answers for that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Doctor.
Hello.
Please, sir.
Mohan sir, this is Ram Mohan. I was fortunate to be in your class of minor fruits long.
Okay. Yeah, I remember you.
Thank you. Excellent talk. I just had a couple of quick questions. First one is, can you comment on the amount of bioavailability of these molecules when you take it as part of the diet, vis-a-vis the capsule form which you just mentioned? And one dosage, another one is to an extent, a follow-up on the previous question, is it something which can be targeted to the cell or to the tumor cell, which is what we want to control?
Yeah, that is still, again, it's not easy to answer that question. How can we target that to the tumor cell? So most of the work done here has been done very well using cancer cell lines, for example, right? Or a mouse model. Most of those studies are done like that. So whether these phytochemicals really in the in vivo situation work, and how to study that is not easy. For example, for turmeric, most of the time they said its bioavailability is very poor. But later on it was shown that turmeric is so quickly absorbed and goes into the brain so quickly by taking a plasma levels and examining the concentration will not give you any idea. So that way, how much it's absorbed and how do we target it to a particular cancer cell line is something which I cannot comment on. Maybe I had to read more to tell you proper answers for that.
Thank you, sir.
Professor Mohan, I thank you for your wonderful lecture. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Shastri, and Professor Uday Kumar also is known to me. So that is some kind of a connection in addition to Prasad, who is also our common friend. Yes. So I really enjoyed your lecture. There are a few questions I do have. There are two questions actually. One is, you spoke about the natural, the presence of these phytochemicals in the natural foods that we consume. What do you think is the reason that, the so-called the active ingredient that people talk about, and the presence of, the packaging, let's say in the natural fruit, there is for want of a better word, I would say it's a packaging. It's like a fruit. You eat everything that is not necessarily the active ingredient, let's say. So what is the difference between when you deliver something as an active ingredient in the form of a pill or a capsule, or when you consume it in its actual packaging, natural packaging? This is my first question. Then I will ask you the second question after that.
Okay, let me give you one simple example. We all know vitamin C. Vitamin C play a major role as an antioxidant, right? And you take vitamin C, you may not see much of an effect. But vitamin C gets oxidized, it has to be reduced in the body, and for that it requires another chemical called glutathione. Then it requires regenerate, it requires vitamin E, and it's a whole cycle. And you are adding one chemical into the body as a capsule, thinking that that is the active ingredient. That may be the active ingredient, but it requires like a concert, a different players in the music to make music. Otherwise, it just can just play a violin and call it as a music concert. So this is what happens when you think that we have to accept that we do not know what is an active ingredient in a complex system. Okay, so when you eat the whole thing as such, you get the whole thing. So as a biochemist, what I do is I'll grind it up and try to get the active ingredient, and I may not have the active ingredient in my hand.
Mhm.
Or I may have the active ingredient, but other accompanying players are missing.
Okay, yeah, thank you, sir. The second question I've had is, now you do these phytochemicals in food, they give you a preventative kind of protection, or are they curative in the sense that when you have a fever, you say you take certain, herbs and, ginger, curcumin and stuff like that. So that is using it to cure or treat it at the particular symptoms that are produced in the system. So how would you compare the two, sir?
Okay, I think in most cases these are preventative. Okay, but having said that, I can give you some example. Let us say there is an infection and you have a fever, and the reason you have a fever is because there is a pyrogenic protein. Pyro means temperature, right?
Mhm.
So the pyrogenic protein is tumor necrosis factor alpha. Is a pyrogenic protein. It increases the temperature. The idea is to prevent the further growth of any organisms by making it uncomfortable for multiplication. So if you use anything, we know there are certain chemicals that can inhibit tumor necrosis factor alpha, and if you take that, it may bring down your fever. So that is possible. There it looks like it's curative in function. But in most cases, whenever a cell goes into abnormal situation, and by the time it shows the symptoms, it is totally different time. It might have taken decades before the symptoms are shown. So at that time, a cure is not a possibility. So if you are taking these nutraceuticals regularly, it may prevent, but curing may be a difficult situation.
So would you be able to recommend some kind of a rough menu, to put it plainly, that will feature some of these things? Because as you said, these are present in micronutrient form. So what kind of a menu would you recommend that we consume? So that, I mean, there are many of these things discussed on the YouTube, but you are a professional and this is your special field. So could you suggest something that people can use on a day-to-day basis and not be, of course, many of these chemicals are very confusing even to someone who has been exposed to a little bit of science,
Right.
such as myself.
Right. Now, this is a question I was afraid of, because when you try to recommend me, I am not in a position to recommend anything. I don't have an expertise in that field. My expertise to some extent ends after the cell understanding the mechanisms. So this is what it requires for a naturopath and also who knows the biochemistry to come together and come to some conclusion. At least one.
Now, what I would like from you is, what would go into thinking about a menu that would support? Let's say we have multiple ways of multiple menus, menus that are being provided by multiple people on the YouTube. But how would you approach this question? Okay, you might be able to answer that.
Well, the first thing I say is that this is it's a little complex in a way to give a proper explanation for this, because I can say you eat grapes, you will get resveratrol, it will do a good job. But if the grape is grown in such a situation, it may have a problem. It may have a ton of chemicals. Probably eat 2 tons of 2 kilograms of pesticides and 1 kilogram of grape. So much of that is sprayed. So in the presence of that, if I say you eat grapes as a source of resveratrol, it may not do anything. So how do we address this, and how do I say what to eat is very difficult.
Okay. Thank you. I understand. It's more from an environmental perspective. Okay.
Yeah,
Just a
Mohan
comment
we
and
have
to
Shankar.
that.
Prasad is
Dr.
there.
Mohan, Dr. Chanesh, can I comment
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, please comment. I too have some things to say. I'll just add later.
Yeah. So what we heard today is a simplistic overview of individual nutraceutical component playing a role. But inside the body, it is much more complex. Each cell in each organ plays and behaves differently when we have multiple other things going on simultaneously. Because there are multiple other factors that also play a role, and it will be too simplistic to think one agent will make a difference to the extent that what we see in the interaction that we saw just now.
Agree. I fully agree with what you say. It is definitely simplistic. And if you look at the whole biochemical event, it's a mystery that it works. So there is a million chances it will go out of order, but it doesn't. So in such a mystery, putting one chemical and expecting some magical change is not great. But having said that, these are food ingredients. So you won't go wrong by taking them. So if it benefits, it will benefit you. But if it's a drug, then it's a problem. So these are various food ingredients. Just by manipulating, for example, my mother-in-law used to take fenugreek seeds along with buttermilk to control her stomach problem. At that time, I had no patience to listen to her. But later on, I found out, after reading all this, fenugreek seeds have diosgenin. It's like a capsule of diosgenin. And buttermilk has probiotics in it. So it will work.
Completely agree with you on this.
Like
there is a lot of things that that needs to be explored in terms of the medicinal benefits of all of these herbs that we just heard about. So yes, it's a mystery and we need to explore it.
Right.
Sandesh,
I tell you,
Dr. Mohan,
yeah.
Can a person totally ignorance of the subject on which you dwelt is permitted to ask a few questions?
What did you say?
A person who is ignorant of the subject on which you dealt, but I have become slightly wiser, am I permitted to ask a question?
Of course, you can ask a question.
Okay, thank you very much. At the outside,
because my knowledge is the whole idea of presenting this is not just to share, and it's actually a mutually benefiting situation.
No, at the outset, I thank Chanesh for taking the initiative of bringing the one and only Dr. Mohan to the lecture. I really enjoyed it. Okay, you made the subject though very interesting. There couldn't have been a more fitting tribute to the late lamented Dr. Subba Rao. Okay,
thank
the highly commemorative lecture. Now I'll come to my question. See, in the light of what's happening in the ecosystem with the pandemic playing havoc, what is the takeaway from all these things? I mean, from your study and what in terms of recommendations, a curative aspect of the various medicines that you dwelt on, and the kind of food habits and kind of lifestyle changes one needs to make. It may not be directly pertinent to what you spoke, but I don't see any person more fitting, more knowledgeable than you to answer this.
Yeah. Prasad and Mohan, I just have something to say before answering by Professor Mohan. Hello. Yeah, I just have a historical anecdote regarding this kind of kind of discourse. Particularly, it happened very early in the Indian context. During 1918, by a scientist by name Robert Macpherson, who was studying about the nutrition of Indian context, and incidentally, who was the first director of National Institute of Hyderabad, National Institute of Nutrition at Hyderabad. Initially, when he started, he was studying about the nutrition of the entire Indian subcontinent systems. ಒಂದು ಬಹುಶಃ ಹ್ಯಾನ್ಸಾ ವ್ಯಾಲಿ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಹಿಮಾಲಯನ್ ವ್ಯಾಲಿ ಇದೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಮುಸ್ಲಿಂ ಟ್ರೈಬ್ he commented on that.
Please repeat.
ಹ್ಯಾನ್ಸಾ ವ್ಯಾಲಿ ಅಂತ, ಹ್ಯಾನ್ಸಾ ಹ್ಯಾನ್ಸಾ ವ್ಯಾಲಿ ಅಂತ, ಅಲ್ಲಿಯ ಒಂದು ಮುಸ್ಲಿಂ ಟ್ರೈಬ್ ಫುಡ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ವಾಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಅಂತ he had commented. What by name ಸರ್ ರಾಬರ್ಟ್ ಮೆಕಾರ್ಸನ್ ಅಂತ. ಇವರು ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷ್ ಮನ್ ಸೈಂಟಿಸ್ಟ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಡ್ ಇನ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ, ಹೂ ವಾಸ್ ದಿ ಡೈರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ಆಫ್ ನ್ಯಾಷನಲ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ನ್ಯೂಟ್ರಿಷನ್. ಇಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಇನಿಷಿಯೇಟೆಡ್ ಇನ್ Kunur. Now it is transferred to Hyderabad, that all we know it. Now, what I am trying to convey is that Indian food system alli, from Himalaya to Kanyakumari, he was interested in studying the different composition and different overall health benefits of Indian food continents. Avara ಒಂದು observation prakara, Hansa Valley food is very interesting. That is Hansa Valley tribes, Muslim tribes, so they were following a vegetarian food system ante. Further, he worked on best of food system antandre Punjab food system. Other next antandre which comprises kind of lot of diversity is South Indian food. ಇದೇ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೇನೆ ಕೂರೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗ he started a study center called Nutrition Study Center for India. Later it grew into a kind of institution. Now it is National Institute of Nutrition at Hyderabad. Now, why I am saying this is in the sense, ಈ ತರದೊಂದು ಕಾನ್ಫ್ಲಿಕ್ಟ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಇದು ಲೈಕ್ ಕಾನ್ಫ್ಲಿಕ್ಟ್ ಅಲ್ಲ, ಲೈಕ್ ಸಮ್ ಕೈಂಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಎ ಡಿಸ್ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಆನ್ ವೆದರ್ ದೇ ಆರ್ ಪ್ರಿವೆಂಟಿವ್ ಆರ್ ಕ್ಯೂರೇಟಿವ್. ದಿ ವೇರಿಯಸ್ ದಿ ಮೇಜರ್ ಕಂಪೋಸಿಷನ್ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಡೈವರ್ಸಿಟಿ, ಸಿಕ್ಕಾಪಟ್ಟೆ ಡೈವರ್ಸಿಟಿ ಇರೋದು ಒಂದು ಫುಡ್ ಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್ ಆಗಿ ನಾವು ಬಳಸ್ತಾ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಓವರ್ ಆಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾಸ್ ಗಾಟ್ ಸಮ್ ನ್ಯೂಟ್ರಿಟಿವ್ ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ ಇನ್ ದ ವೆಲ್ ಬೀಯಿಂಗ್ ಆಫ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮನ್ ಬೀಯಿಂಗ್ ಅನ್ನೋ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟ್ ಸರ್ ರಾಬರ್ಟ್ ಮೆಕಾರ್ಸನ್ಗೆ ಇತ್ತು ಅಂತ ನನಗೆ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ.
So that's very, I mean, that's a very good value add, Dr. Chennai. Thanks very much.
In fact, it's very well documented in the nutrition history.
Oh, very good.
Okay, please.
Can I just add to the question that Prasad posed? Although not a direct extension, but a kind of tangential extension. See, you...
As long as it is not opposing, it's okay.
No, tangents don't oppose.
Okay, I got you.
They graze you by. You won't know. You will realize it only later. Okay. So, Professor Mohan, see, what is interesting is, I'm just taking this question forward. Like, if in the early part of 20th century, the food habits of a particular community has been studied and found to be very beneficial, now, say 100 years later, and keeping in view the observation that you made that 5% genetic factors play a role in maintenance of health, and 95% environmental factors go to play a role in the health of an individual, how would you look at it? Because then imagine the kind of changes that have been brought into the kind of system, the ecosystem that we are living in today. So how would you respond to such a change? Because obviously the ecosystem in 1918 and ecosystem in 2021 are very, very different. So over to you, sir.
This actually, in my opinion, we should have another talk showing how the environment is playing a role. To give you one simple example of milk, the chemicals are injected into the cow. And what happens to those chemicals? And how do they play on you? And starting from antibiotics, hormones. Those hormones, animal hormones are human hormones. How do they interact? They increase what is known as the IGF-1 or the insulin-like growth factor. So the insulin-like growth factor has similarity to insulin. So what does it do? Does it, fight with insulin, cause insulin resistance, cause disease, diabetes? Or the plastic in which the milk is stored. It releases bisphenol. Bisphenols are endocrine disrupting chemicals. They work at very low concentrations. They mimic endocrine hormones. How do these play? And there's a whole lot of things like that. So the environment has definitely changed. And finally, we have to blame it on rice for diabetes. So all my predecessors ate rice day in and out, and they lived for 100 years. And now we blame it on rice. So when you get diabetes, you cannot eat rice. That is the truth. But rice does not cause diabetes. There are other factors in it.
So
Thank
that's
you. Thank you, Professor. Yeah.
Sir, I wanted to ask one thing. This is Devraj. Sir, you mentioned one grape example during your talk. The infected grape has got some useful content in terms of its nutraceutical value. Keeping that in mind, I mean, this insight actually throws a bigger light on the way we use pesticides in keeping the farming very clean, clean farming, and also prophylactically we use huge quantities of chemicals to avoid any pest and other disease causing organisms. Taking the insight from your clue, the plants or the crops express so many useful things once they are challenged by some kind of pest.
Right.
This is actually very important in terms of now the whole world is now looking at organic farming, safe food and all that, sir. And also the chemical industry also, I think they are already paying attention, but need to get it clear. The kind of chemicals, the intensity, the concentration that we use, all these things need to be streamlined to allow the crop to have its complete nutraceutical value when it reaches the consumer, isn't it, sir?
Right. So any plant when it accumulates the nutraceuticals, it's a function of either it produces naturally or in response to some stress factors, or it is a stage of development. Like cannabis, it may not have anything till it flowers. So like that.
Yes, sir. So this ISKCON people, I'm reminded to. Yeah, I was saying ISKCON people intentionally pick up vegetables which are not very clean. Slightly infected or infected. Such vegetables they choose. Keeping this in mind, I was told by one of them that these vegetables are really good in terms of nutrition rather than very clean vegetables. I was just reminded of that, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
This is Dr. Shiv Prakash, retired professor of fisheries science from Mangalore. I'm sorry I joined late. I was in another webinar. I just want to mention what Dr. Chandesh mentioned. Dr. Robert, who conducted research in India, a British nutritionist, there is a very interesting report on his experiment. When he visited people in North India, in Punjab, he was astonished to see people very tall, robust, well-built, very good complexion, looking particularly very healthy. But when he traveled down south in Chennai, in Madras, he found people, most of them with belly pot-bellied people. And then when he went in the middle of India, in Madhya Pradesh and other places, people were in intermediary phase in appearance. Then he conducted one research. He took 3 pairs of mice, and to one pair he fed chapatis, ghee, egg, milk, and a very nutritious diet. And then to the other pair he fed rice, sambar, curds, and things like that. And then to the third pair of mice he fed intermediary composition. Then when he reared them, he found those mice which were fed with highly nutritious food they were having very shining fur on their body, and they were looking robust and particularly very healthy. But when he observed those which were fed with rice, sambar and curds only, and very little of ghee maybe, he found that pot-bellied mice had evolved, and fur had fallen off here and there, and it was not looking particularly very healthy. He came to the conclusion that it is nutrition that matters. Thank you.
I have one more question. This is Raghunathan. One of the questions I have is somewhat in parallel to what you have discussed today. This has to do with petrification of meat, and in India in particular, a tropical country where refrigeration was not there, once meat is cut, that is, the animal has been killed and meat is taken, petrification starts, I believe, immediately. And the groups that used to travel observed that if we consume that meat, we are more likely to get infected, and therefore became vegetarians. So, do you have any response to that question, and whether that is the genesis of how things have come about in India?
Well, no, but the only thing I think of is animal diseases can be transmitted to humans very easily, but not from plants. So maybe like what happened with the bats now and the coronavirus, maybe something happened previously and they decided to give up, or some sects might have decided to give up on eating non-vegetarian food. That is what I really don't know the correct answer for that.
So there is a question in the chat box. Sir, in spite of all these problems of environment, etc., still the longevity of people has increased. Is it because of the awareness, or have we become immune?
I don't know the actual data about the longevity.
Can I answer?
I can take up that question. Actually, the longevity has increased because of the advent of a lot of medical changes that has happened, and because of general improvement in overall living. Earlier, the longevity was less because we didn't have cure for infections, and the nutrition and other aspects were not that great. That's the reason why people were dying. And if you look at infant mortality, because of inadequate health infrastructure, people wouldn't reach year 5. So a lot of children who die young. So all of that is improved because of some improvements in overall medical infrastructure and changes in medicine, and some overall improvement in economy and other stuff, and not anything else, I think.
No, thank you, Sandesh. There is one more thing, that there is an evolutionary lifespan kind of issues have been worked very recently. How long a cell can live, or overall the composition of the cell, so-called organism, can live, particularly with respect to the Homo sapiens. They have worked from the Homo erectus and even beyond that. As such, if nothing can happen to the human body, in the sense no infections and very good nutrition and very good everything kind of that, the evolutionary age can be between 120 to 150 years of age. And there is a lady by name, I'm just not able to recall her name, in France, who lived for 122 years, the longest ever lived human being is the record. And in that sense, there is a longevity in the evolutionary sense we have, but there is a complexity because of the lot of environmentals as well. There is a so-called other stresses. Up to it is worked out that's about 120 to 150 years in between that, because there is evidence that 122 years have been as a record of highest long-lived human being. In fact, soon the people from our website reader can have a very detail of notes on that, which I am preparing, in fact, because we are worried how long we can live in the corona context. So it's a satisfactory answer from our own evolution, in the sense that we can live, if at all, if the same safety can reach us. Okay, thank you.
Hello. Dr. Mohamkumar, I have a question. I'm Chandrakant here.
Hey, Chandrakant.
There was a discussion regarding increasing life expectancy at birth by about 10 years. I would like to inform you, of course, all that there's a concept called DALY, that is a disability adjusted life years. So the DALY has also increased by 10 years. There's no use of living longer, and an average Indian lives for 10 years long, but he lives with some ailment or disease. Even United States citizen also lives for 10 years with ailment, irrespective of the per capita income in United States being 17 times higher than that of Indian. Therefore, it is not just the longevity which is important, it is the number of healthy years which we are living is more important. Just I wanted to inform.
Yeah, true. What Professor Chandrakant said, longevity with respect to the healthy living is also contested. Yeah, very true.
If I may add, as an aside, Dr. Subba Rao used to say that people who live to be very old, I mean, of course, he had reference to the point just made by the previous, speaker, that the survival of the unfittest. I'm sorry, just as an aside on that, Dr. Chanesh will corroborate me on this.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we had many sort of such things, and in that sense, a real tribute.
To add up to the discussions, sir, food is a complex in nature, and as the diversity across the geographic area varies, the food system and food habits also varies, and each and every geographic area and the tribes, they are having the inbuilt system of food intakes, and the way how it digests, how it helps for the nutrition is a different and a dynamic phenomenon. That's why of late it has food should be the medicine, and the medicine should be also food. Having said this, yes, there is not a single prescription or a solution for all the diseases or whatever we call, but there are the solutions in our food. That is very much true. Only thing is we have to identify what is that solution and how to bring it in our plate. That is my concern, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
I also want to say something more interesting here is although we have the genes and for longevity or any disease or whatever, we can acquire those genes from the environment. So how do we do that? So it is because, let us say, for example, you are exposed constantly to the plastic contaminants like bisphenols. So bisphenols can do gene methylation, and then those genes can be transmitted up to 3 generations. They are called the obesinogen, and the 3 generations of mice they show became obese, and they were exposed to the bisphenols. So although you inherited nice genes, but from the environment you change the genetic code to make it a heritable character, so that those papers are available.
Akash, you can give the vote of thanks then. Akash, vote Akash.
Thank you, Venkatesh. So all good things has to come to an end. ಸೊ ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರದಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುಬ್ಬರಾವ್ ಹೆಸರಿನಲ್ಲಿ ನೆನಪಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳ ಒಂದು ಫ್ರೂಟ್ಫುಲ್ ಆದಂಥ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಮತ್ತು ನಂತರದ ಚರ್ಚೆಗಳು ನಡೀತು. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಕಾರಣಕರ್ತರಾದವರು ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ GN ಮೋಹನ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರು. ಇವಾಗ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ತಡರಾತ್ರಿ ಈ ಹೊತ್ತಿನಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಬಹಳ ತಾಳ್ಮೆಯಿಂದ ತಮ್ಮ ವಿಚಾರಗಳನ್ನ ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಹಂಚಿಕೊಂಡು ಮತ್ತೆ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನ ಕೇಳಿದ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಉತ್ತರ ನೀಡಿದಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಮೋಹನ್ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು CPUS ಪರವಾಗಿ ತುಂಬಾ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಜಿ.ಎನ್. ಮೋಹನ್.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ಮತ್ತೆ ಈ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ವಿಚಾರ, ಈ ಒಂದು ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಮಾಲಿಕೆ ನಡೆಸೋದಿಕ್ಕೆ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವರ ಕುಟುಂಬ, ಅವರ ಶ್ರೀಮತಿಯವರು, ಮಗ ಕಿಶೋರ್, ಅವರ ಧರ್ಮಪತ್ನಿ ಹಾಗೂ ಕುಟುಂಬದ ಶ್ರೀ ಶಂಕರ್ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಸಹಕಾರ ನೀಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ CPUS ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಸಕ್ತರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ನಾನು ಪೂರ್ವಕ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಒನ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಆಲ್.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ಮತ್ತೆ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ವಿಚಾರ, ಒಂದು ಓಪನಿಂಗ್ ರಿಮಾರ್ಕ್ಸ್ ಅನ್ನ ಮಾಡಿ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಅವರ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿತ್ವದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಬೆಳಕು ಚೆಲ್ಲದಂತ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಚನ್ನೇಶ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಹಾಗೂ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೆರೆದಿರುವ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಸಕ್ತರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಚನ್ನೇಶ್.
ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ಸೊ ಇದರೆಲ್ಲರ ಹೊರತಾಗಿ ಈ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ ಆಸಕ್ತರು ಬಹಳ ಮುಖ್ಯ. ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ತುಂಬಾ ಟೆಕ್ನಿಕಲ್ ಆದಂತ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ ಆದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಅಕಾಡೆಮಿಕ್ ರಿಗರ್ನ ಬಿಟ್ಕೊಡ್ದೇನೆ ಬಹಳಷ್ಟು ಜನ, ಒಂದು 60 ಜನ ತನಕ ಒಂದು ಕಾಲಘಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ರು. ನಂತರ ಒಂದು 50 ಜನ ಸಂಪೂರ್ಣ ಈ ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಕೇಳಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಸೊ ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮೋಹನ್ ಅವರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, CPUS ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಸುಬ್ರಾವ್ ಕುಟುಂಬದ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪಾರ್ಟಿಸಿಪೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ ಆಸಕ್ತರು ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಾವು ತುಂಬಾ ಹೃದಯದ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತೀವಿ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು ಸೋ ಮಚ್.
Thank you all. Thank you.
ಇದ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಇದ್ರ ಹಿಂದೆ ಇದನ್ನ ಆರ್ಗನೈಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಹಲವಾರು ಹೆಲ್ಪಿಂಗ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಸ್ ಇದ್ದು, ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ವೆಂಕಟೇಶ್, MK ಶಂಕರ್, ಸಂದೇಶ್ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಯೋಗದಾನವನ್ನ ನೀಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಾ, ಮೇ ಬಿ ತಡರಾತ್ರಿ ಆಗಿದೆ, ಮೋಹನ್ ಸರ್ ಇನ್ನೊಮ್ಮೆ ನಾವು ಫ್ರೀ ಆಗಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋಣ. ಎಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ನಿಮಗೆ ವಂದನೆಗಳನ್ನ ತಿಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಐ ಸೇ ಗುಡ್ ಬೈ. ಥ್ಯಾಂಕ್ ಯು.
ಲಿಂಕ್ ಕಳಿಸಿಕೊಟ್ಟ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಚೆನ್ನೇಶ್ ಅವರಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು.
Thank you, Chanesh and everyone.
Shankar, thank you, Mohan.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Sir, Professor Mohan.